Hey everyone, I'm back with another game from the ChessGoals repertoire. This game, we got to this position, and the course move is this, excuse me, not there, but the course move is here. And the idea is that we're going to capture with the bishop, and then they play pawn takes, we get this queen g5, and they play rook 81, and we have sort of an interesting game with some potential attack on the king side, and then also some threats here thanks to this pen. But I've played a couple games lately where Queen D3 was played, and that's perhaps a better move, and it changes the plans in the way that we're looking. So we do go ahead and just castle, and here my opponent chose to play bishop to G4. But I played a different game recently that here they just went A3, and when I was analyzing that game, I found that just this idea where you play rook c8, rook ac1, you capture with the knight instead of the bishop now, and you do this because of the pin. And this pin can be obnoxious, and then with a3 having been played, there's some weaknesses on the queen side, and you can play queen to b6, so they play rook c2 to defend this guy, and you go knight a5, and there's some threats later where you're going to capture here, or sorry, not capture here, but play here, and we have the queen maybe comes to b6, and there's some ideas where you take on b2 and you win a pawn here, and we have good play on the queen side. So I had this in mind when I reached this position with queen to d3 again. So I did go ahead and castle, but this time they played bishop to g4 and did not play this move on the queen side, and they didn't play the rook to c8. And so I had an idea going to this. I was going to try to play this in the same way. And so my game went captures, and then I played queen out to b6. Sorry, rook to c8 is what I played first, and then they went rook to f3, and then I went knight a5, and then they just brought the other rook across, and I went ahead and tried to launch into my little attack that I was going for, and was immediately blown off the board with rook takes f7. The point being that if I capture the rook, they will take back this pawn. There's a pin. They're going to get their rook back, and I'm going to lose a ton of material, and the game's just over. It's just bad. So when I was looking at games, I tried to see, okay, how do I handle this then? Because this seems like a pretty straightforward plan for white to just gang up on the f-file, since it is open, since we did capture on this e3, and I found a really nice game. And so the idea is that after you do capture the bishop with the knight, again giving you this sort of pressure here, we do have a dark squared bishop versus all of these nice dark squares, you play queen to e7. And queen to e7 defends the e6 pawn. We're not going off to the queen side yet. I mean, perhaps if they go something passive like bishop a3, we could consider moves like this and trying to play on the queen side. But against this straightforward plan, just rook to f3, and you play rook 88. And this move looks kind of weird, but maybe you remember a move similar to this from the lines where the queen's on d2, and we have our queen out here, and there's some protection of this pawn. And that comes into case here, because our idea is actually to play f5. This is what our idea is, and we can't play f5 immediately. If we do, we play f5, and our point is we're going to take back with the pawn. They have e4, and we would love to be able to capture that, but there's some problems if we do. I mean, well, we can, but they get some activity and things are looking good. We have some problems here. This is not so great. So we play rook 88, so that when f5 happens, there's no e4, because when we capture, this d4 pawn would be hanging. So rook 8 f1, just continuing on with their plan, and we play f5. And they're basically forced to take en passant because of this bishop being trapped. So they take, and we take back with the pawn is the idea. Not the bishop like you normally see. The bishop here looks kind of stunted. We're not going to do anything. I mean, we have to play e5 eventually. We are thankful for this queen being on e7 because it's defending this pawn, makes this whole idea possible. Rook g3, pretty natural looking move. The idea is that maybe I'm going to capture here and then play h4. So we just step out of the way, no problem. Move the bishop out of the way, and we play bishop to h4, kicking the rook back. They go back here, and now we play rook to g8 with some pretty clear intentions of going to try to attack on the king side. We're going to later play f5. We'll bring the queen across and come out, and maybe even we can double our rooks at some point if we need to. So the queen drops back, proactively defending this g2 square. Notice that our bishop is really nicely placed. It means that white can't easily defend with a rook on the second rank like they would like to, so the queen drops back to do that. We go ahead and play queen to g7 and king to h1. The idea is that we're going to try to put the pawn behind the rook, and really there's some times when white should try to go for this g4 idea to try to counter. So we play f5, meaning that this e4 pawn is never going to come forward again, so we're happy about that. And now bishop to a4, and this is probably my favorite maneuver of the game. This is quite nice. We have this beautiful e4 square, and white would really like to capture here, force us to take back with a pawn, and then they have something to play against. Because right now, we don't have any weaknesses. I mean, okay, fine, e6 is a weakness, but no one's getting there. And I love this, knight to e7, saying, no, you will not take our knight. Our knight is headed where? To e4. We're going to come through c8 to d6 to e4, and we're going to have a wonderful piece on the e4 square. White goes ahead and plays rook to g1, and we play queen to h6, which puts some pressure on this pawn. It also maybe discourages g3 from playing, which we're going to look later that perhaps g3 might be the best way to play, because maybe we're going to move back, capture this guy, or not capture this guy, but then have some threats here. White plays knight to e2 with a pretty clear idea. They're going to head over to the f4 square, which is another nice thing that the queen does from h6, putting pressure against the king and also still keeping an eye on this e6 pawn, which is quite helpful. Now knight to c8, continuing our plan. The knight comes in, and we head up to d6. Now white chose to play bishop to c2, expecting that this was going to come, and they're just going to chop it because they don't want to leave this strong knight there. It was probably better to play g3, and this move is a strange looking move and probably not one I would really consider because it feels like we're under quite a bit of attack and we don't like it. The idea is they're going to kick the bishop out, they're opening up an additional line for the queen to come across and help defend. We can play bishop to g5, and for queen h2, we actually, the best move is just to take this knight, because this was quite a nice knight, quite annoying, putting pressure here, and just a great knight. And actually, white would like to take back with a pawn, but they really can't. They're forced to take back with the rook. At least that's what's best. If they choose to play e takes, well, now we're going to go knight to e4 anyway. And if bishop to c2 now, trying to get rid of that knight, because we do have some ideas with some tactics involved taking here, we go queen to g7, we're already touching this pawn, so if you were to capture here, we would take back, and this pawn would fall. So rook to d3, trying to defend the pawn, but we can go rook to c7, or sorry, rook to c8. We're going to transfer across and create problems on this file now. So instead, something like bishop to b3, trying to get out of that, we already have some ideas of trying to get into the position, and we're going to be doing quite well here, I think. We have some strong ideas. Our threat was to play rook to c4, actually, already, which is why bishop to b3 is the best move. Now, the other option is to take with a g-pawn, which this just loses immediately. We go knight to e4, and we have some really nasty ideas coming up. I mean, this is like a -6, -7 position. It doesn't immediately seem obvious why, but white is really tied up here. If they go back to bishop c2, honestly, things don't change much if they trade rooks, because, I mean, we're going to trade rooks soon anyway. We're going to take, they take, and we bring this rook in, and they come back, trying to defend the pawn. Notice that this rook is a little bit stuck. Hard for him to come back, because if he drops back to here, we have this fork, and if he drops back to here, well, we just take it. So we play queen to h6, and our idea is to play queen to e1. You can't block with the rook, because then we do have check, and we pick up the rook. So here white tries to play could try to play bishop to d3, but we give this check anyway. And after they drop back, we have this really nice move. You can't capture with the rook, because then we'll capture here, and big problems. After we take the rook here, of course. So then we would just be, so something like this takes, And if you can't take it because the queen's defending, you're huge problems here. And the idea is that if you try to just move the king, I mean this, I don't know, this just seems too lethal. I mean, we can capture here with check, you can't take it, you've got nothing better than to go back, and I mean this is just murderous. So for all of these reasons, after they got to take with the rook. And when they take with the rook, then we can jump into here, and we're already attacking 2 pawns, and we're going to pick up a pawn. And with really not much that white can really do about it. So instead of the g3 idea, they chose to play bishop to c2, intending to chop the knight. We go ahead and jump in the inner way, because they chopped the knight, we say great. We take back with this pawn, and this is a clever idea. The rook has to drop back, and we hit it up with e5, taking advantage of this pin, which wasn't really possible if we had taken back with the f pawn. So now we drive the knight back, and now f4. And the idea is that we're sacrificing a pawn, at least temporarily, but we get these double connected passed pawns in the center of the board. And this is just really cool. It's really tough for white to play this position and to handle it. Rook to d1 is what they chose. Bring the queen across to defend the pawn. It looks like you can take it, but you really can't, because we'll just play bishop to f6 and you're going to lose your knight. So g3, just kicking the bishop out. We come here, and the knight drops back, and we play d3, just advancing forward. We wanted to lead with this pawn, because we can use our bishop and queen to advance the second pawn. The queen moves out of the way, and we bring in the second rook to defend this guy. And now, when he brings the rook in, we go ahead and grab this pawn. We're just going to liquidate down. We didn't have to do this, but with these connected passed pawns, it's certainly going to cause major problems. So knight takes d3 is what white chose. I mean, there's really not a lot else to do. I mean, if you just try to play, say, I don't know, here, just a waiting move. Well, we'll just grab here, and e3. And, okay, I got to go back, right? So d2. Okay, well, now I got to move this guy, so maybe here? Okay, well, here. And this is just terrible. So white chose to just go ahead and give up the knight for the 2 pawns. And grabs this guy, and now we go behind our passed pawn. We're going to create a new passed pawn right here, and our plan is very simple. We're going to run these guys up the board. And I think it was really cool how black finished this game out, because it seems like the white maybe is going to get some counterplay with their own pawns, but we're going to see that ours is quite a bit faster. White starts to bring the king up. We advance this pawn, and then we advance this pawn. White tries to come back behind. We just advance it, and we advance it again, and now this pawn is protected. And now we'll just continue bringing this pawn up the board. So g4 and g5, and this is a nice move. We bring the bishop back, defending this guy, and then our plan is simple. We're just going to bring the rook here, 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 and then go make a queen. And that's exactly what happens. King to f4. Notice how slow. It takes so many moves for white to get going. It was 1, 2, 3, 4. We need like 5 or 6 moves with each pawn, plus the king has to come up with them. Because our bishop is doing a fantastic job just cutting this off. And so the pawns can't go up on their own. So rook to e8. Rook to e8 is also possible. Continues, and we bring across. And this was an important moment. It was important that we bring the king over right now, so that if the pawn advances, we can go in front of the pawn. So the king comes up further, and maybe has some ideas of trying to get some mate threats. I mean, we do always have checks if we have to, which is a nice thing to have in our pocket. Go ahead and grab this pawn. King comes in, and he's going to give us a series of checks to try to force the king out. And so the king is ways away from the pawn. Maybe this looks scary, but we have enough resources. We have a rook that's going to come behind the pawn, and we have a bishop that can defend the queening square. So f7, we just give a check. And then we forced the king out, and we played here, and here white decided to throw in the towel. I mean, at this point, we can probably even sack the rook, just completely sack the rook if we have to. So, for example, something like here, I mean, he's not even threatened to promote. So we'll do nothing. A2, and say we'll give him this move. We're not even going to give a check. We'll come here and give him this move, and we can just sack. Of course, I mean, what are you going to do? Take and There's nothing. So makes sense why after this bishop to b7 move, black just resigned. So this was a really cool game, and I was pretty impressed with this. And so going back to the main idea, the plan that we're executing in this game comes after this queen d3, which is a big difference between queen d3 and queen d2. The point being that after queen d3, if we try for our regular plan, where we play bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen to f5, this gets us into trouble immediately because there's no pin here, which means that they have this capture, and after we take back, they can just grab here, which is no good. And this isn't possible when the queen is back on d3 because the queen's not touching f5. So, but this plan after bishop g4 and capturing this way, with the queen coming to e7, this is key, and then bringing the rook into d8, which are also key. These are both preparatory moves for f5, which is a really cool move, forcing this exchange, and then we take back with the pawn, and we're going to build kind of a stonewall looking center and get nice attack along the g file using our bishop. There were some lines I was looking at when I analyzed this that the bishop actually comes across back to this diagonal and creates threats that way. So really interesting game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Check out the Caro-Kann repertoire course if you're interested in learning more about this line. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.